On episode 247 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Hillary Wright and discuss her book, The PCOS Diet Plan, second edition, a natural approach to health for women with polycystic ovary syndrome. Guys, I know it's easy to want to tune out on this one, but this is an important and growing risk item that's happening for women. And if you have women in your life, it's worth taking a little bit of time to get to know what this is. So invest a few minutes here and let's learn something about this because it's very important to the health of women. And again, it is a growing thing. So I think it's important for all of us to know a little bit about it. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/247. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. If you've been listening to the podcast regularly, then you know that I'm about to stop taking one-on-one clients for a while to focus on some other matters. But I wanted to give you this last opportunity. There's only a little more than a week left to sign up for training with me. And one of the things that I really want to stress here when I talk about training is that this is customized one-on-one training for you. It's the same thing as having a personal trainer in the gym. I'm just not there counting reps with you. But I'm giving you the workouts. We're talking about what's happening. We're talking about your food. We're doing all the things necessary to help you meet your goals. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of research. You hear it in my interviews. I do take the time to learn this stuff. I do take the time to understand how it applies to us, specifically those of us over 40. And so I want to bring that to you one-on-one, help you get the results that you deserve now. So if you want to do this, again, I'm going to be shutting off pretty soon, but you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/application. And for filling out the application, I'll give you a free 30-minute consult. We can talk about anything you want to talk about during that 30 minutes. It's not a sales call. It's just a general consult. We'll talk about health and fitness, and then you can make the decision if you want to work with me one-on-one. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/train. Our guest today is the Director of Nutritional Counseling at the Domar Center for Mind-Body Health at Boston IVF and a nutritionist at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. She lives with her husband and 3 sons in Arlington, Massachusetts. Our guest today is Hillary Wright. So Hillary, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I get your book, the PCOS Diet Plan, and I obviously don't have ovaries. But I do think that this is an extremely important topic for both men and women. And we'll get into some of the reasons why I really feel that beyond just being a caretaker and being there for someone that's suffering from this is this disease is not necessarily in and of itself my opinion, and it is that as I got to read in this book, it doesn't feel like a single individual thing. It seems like it's wrapped up in a whole lot of things that we're going to suffer with if we're not living proper lifestyles.
No, I would totally agree. I mean, the things that you do, control inflammation and neutralize oxidation and, help your body to detoxify itself will trickle down to reducing your risk of a lot of health problems. And so PCOS, like most chronic diseases, is a genetic mismatch condition that responds, very positively to healthy living. So, and that's true for many health problems, to your point. Now,
there's one thing you say early on in the book that sometimes I latch on to statements, and I just kind of love this. Is you got this actually from someone else, their philosophy, but it says grounded in science and inspired by compassion. And you wrote this book that way. And that's what I kind of like is if you know someone or you're suffering from this kind of condition, just the references that you have in the back of the book are worth the price of admission because you did do a lot of research to kind of understand this condition and what people can do to manage it.
Oh, goodness, yes. And, with the revision of this book, thankfully, there was a lot more research available to tap into, but nothing provides more education to myself and to women with this condition than to speak with people who suffer from it and be able to bring together the evidence that the research is laying out along with my clinical experience of 17 years of talking to thousands of women with this condition. Just to feel heard and understood is so important because so many people still don't know yet what this condition is, even though it's so common. I guarantee if people haven't heard about it, somebody around them has it that may or may not even know they have it. So just to have women read this book and really think, I think she gets me is really the most important thing to me.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about reading the book was it was a very balanced approach. So I really kind of felt as I got into it, it's like, okay, there's not one solution. There's not a magic pill that's going to make this condition go away, because you're talking in the book, and we'll get into some of these, healthy food choices, exercise, supplements, and self-care, and kind of comprehensively those things together, and then working with your practitioner, and it may involve some medication, but kind of putting that all together is what's going to kind of get you over the hump with this thing.
Oh, yes. There's definitely a synergistic thing going on when it comes to managing PCOS. It's not just like flipping a light switch. There are a number of pieces. And again, this is true of pretty much all chronic health problems. There are a number of pieces that need to come together that synergistically create a body environment that feels better and is more resistant to disease. And in the case of PCOS, promotes fertility and reduces diabetes and heart disease risk. So that's the state of nutrition, period. We're a superfoods culture that we think, often, and I'm being facetious, but, as long as I eat blueberries, I'm all set. Or as long as I don't drink soda, it's all good. But we actually know that there's much more synergy involved in creating a healthy body.
Okay, so let's take one step back, and I want to ask the question, okay, what is PCOS?
So PCOS is the most common hormonal disorder affecting women of reproductive age. We believe it affects, the statistics range anywhere from 5 to 18% of all women. And the way I try to describe PCOS is it's an endocrinology problem. So endocrinology involves reproductive function, thyroid function, blood sugar regulation. And endocrinology functions I like to think of them as planets in a solar system. They're supposed to orbit around each other, sometimes facilitate each other, but sometimes they crash into each other. And we now have an appreciation that PCOS is largely a kind of a crashing in of blood sugar regulation and reproductive hormone function that results in hormonal dysregulation, the fallout of which runs the gamut from increased risk of diabetes. I mean, we know that 50% of women with PCOS will be diabetic or pre-diabetic by the age of 40, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of endometrial cancer, and the most heartbreaking of all is an increased risk of infertility. So it's a hormonal disorder that is most strongly influenced by diet and lifestyle change.
Yeah, I like that analogy. My analogy is more like an orchestra where, when they're all playing to the conductor, everything's beautiful. But that first few minutes where they're doing their little warm-ups and are all kind of doing their own thing, and it's so disjointed and broken. I almost hate listening to that part of it. I'm like, I know this is going to get good, so I got to stick through this. But yeah, I kind of get that as the crashing or the disorder that we would have within our endocrine system. And that's everything. I mean, that's our energy, that's our body fat, that's everything you're talking about there is literally, that's every aspect of your life is damaged or deranged if you haven't gotten control of your endocrine system.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I should also mention it most certainly affects your psychological health from an increased risk of eating disordered behaviors like bulimia and compulsive overeating, but also mood disorders and just your central nervous system, regularly being exposed to significant fluctuations in blood sugar levels. Energy can go high and low. Cravings can emerge that these women often report as feeling out of control, almost like I'm addicted to sugar. And so my approach has been always that I refuse to believe that people are not smart enough to understand how their body works. They just need it explained in a way that they can understand. And PCOS is absolutely a disorder that once you understand what you're doing with food and activity and stress management and sleep, etc., that changes, the conversation completely. You're dressing this up in a different outfit. It's no longer just lose weight and exercise. It is, let's control your hormones. Let's help you connect the dots between when I eat this way or when I exercise or not. It affects my physical and emotional health in ways that I can actually feel and appreciate. You really have to dig into this and help women see that your body isn't the enemy here. It's just that women with PCOS are really sensitive to the negative effects of modern life. But actually, really understanding that, I find really changes the dialogue tremendously. It's very empowering.
And I think one of the core things, I'm 51, and I just, even though I know it would be possible to have a child, I love my children, but I'm going to be cool with grandchildren when it's time. I don't want to have a child, being over 40. And so, but all that said, this is not just a fertility problem that women that are looking to have children are going to suffer through. There's lingering effects, and you kind of touched on some of that with the emotional and some of the psychological issues that are going to occur. Could you kind of talk about, for a woman over 40, what this condition is going to be about for them?
Oh, yes. So one of the first things that comes up in my conversations with a new client who has PCOS is, and they generally come to me. I'm the director of nutrition for a mind-body center affiliated with a fertility treatment practice. So many of these women are trying to have babies. Most stressfully, they're often finding out they have PCOS in the context of already being really stressed out about the fertility thing. But one of the first things I say to them is, I'm absolutely here to help you have a baby, but I really don't want you to develop diabetes. I mean, when you think of that statistic that it's estimated that 50% of women with PCOS will be diabetic or pre-diabetic by the age of 40, that is a really big number. And diabetes that settles in earlier on in life stands to really wreak havoc at a much earlier age, as has been the case in the past. So, that risk of diabetes, as with anyone, who doesn't have PCOS, as life goes on, your risk for diabetes goes up. As life goes on, your risk for heart disease goes up. Your risk for cancers goes up. So those in the early stages, what often draws attention to PCOS is the effect it's having on reproductive hormones and menstrual cycles and fertility. But really, the big game picture here is this is a metabolic condition that has very far-reaching effects on health for the entire life cycle. Fortunately, it very strongly responds to changes in diet and lifestyle. And, my goal, once I educate my clients on what this is all about, is to get them moving in a health direction, for a long enough period of time that they start to realize, wow, I feel a lot better when I eat according to the manual I was born with, which is, mostly whole foods, not too much meat, trying to limit refined carbohydrates. Those things are not just, this is a good idea, do it and, it will be a good idea. You actually will feel a lot better. And that is something that, extends beyond the reproductive years. I mean, who doesn't want to feel better in their body, throughout their entire life?
Yeah. Now, we're going to circle back around to the diabetes because that's a little bit of a deeper bit of conversation. And so I want to touch on one of your strategies, and it's an eating strategy that you call the carbohydrate distributed diet. And now, obviously, a diabetic has to manage their blood sugar, manage their carbohydrates, and that's kind of a strategy for them as well. So this is the same general strategy I've kind of run across time and time again. So I want you to kind of define how you look at a carbohydrate distributed diet. And then I want to deep dive a little bit further into that to talk about the disease state.
Sure. So carbohydrates, this is a very controversial subject, has been going on 10 years now. And carbohydrates, we have a very clear understanding that eating a lot of refined carbohydrates is very toxic to the body on many levels, even beyond blood sugar regulation. Unfortunately, with PCOS, women often all they hear is carbs are bad, can't eat carbs. So clearly that's throwing all carbohydrates into the same bucket. So a healthful carbohydrate distributed diet starts by identifying carbohydrates that are naturally occurring and healthful and differentiating them from those that are refined and processed. And then saying, listen, when you eat a carbohydrate, regardless of the quality, so we're always going to emphasize quality whole foods carbs, regardless of quality, you eat a carbohydrate, an hour later your blood sugar is going to rise, and the degree of elevation is directly proportional to the quantity of the carbohydrates you ate. So a carbohydrate distributed diet would encourage what I call in my books the 2 Qs, emphasizing good quality carbohydrates and being mindful of the quantity that you consume at an individual sitting. So rather than doing the typical American thing, so, I've been counseling people for about 28 years. The American way is to not eat enough during the day and then have food escalate as the day goes on, including, largely, significantly carbohydrates. So rather than kind of being led along by your instincts and your hunger in terms of when you eat and how much you eat, being a proactive eater by picking good quality carbohydrates and spreading them out over the day, that is the most potent way to influence then what goes on with your blood sugar regulation, your insulin response, and your hormones. So it's unfortunate that women often hear carbs are bad, carbs are bad. I don't know how many times I've had to convince people that eating whole fruit is absolutely a healthy thing to do. But what I see often is just because too much refined carbohydrate is the problem does not mean the solution is getting rid of the carbs. I help my clients try to find the mid ground because I'm not trying to put these people on one more diet. I'm trying to educate them about how their body works, focus on quality carbohydrates, and spread them out so their blood sugars roll over the day instead of spiking and dropping, because that means their insulin levels will roll over the day as well. And that's what starts to muck around with these women's hormones and cause a lot of the symptomology.
So that's why I want to circle back around. And I would say, okay, when we talk about type 1 diabetes, it's obviously a genetic problem where someone is not able to create the insulin that their body needs to survive, because they would go into a shock if they ended up with eating carbs, and that's obviously not a good thing. And then type 2 is a lifestyle induced version of that, where you now become insulin resistant because you've had too much blood sugar spikes. Your insulin level's been high for such an extended period of time that your body kind of breaks down to a point of saying, we just can't keep up. We can't do this, and the insulin resistance kicks in. So we have the type 2 diabetes. And when I've interviewed people about Alzheimer's, and I did one not long ago, that kind of same thing came up, is that, Alzheimer's is now, some people are actually phrasing it as type 3 diabetes.
Yeah, diabetes of the brain. Yep.
And I have to admit, through much of the reading of this book, I kind of was like, that same kind of message just kept resonating. And you use this term in the book, bearded lady diabetes, which kind of makes me think that while there is probably a genetic aspect to PCOS, is that it might be type 4 diabetes, if we really wanted to think about it in a way where we're talking about insulin resistance and the issues our body's going through. It's just another series of symptoms that we're having to deal with as a function of lifestyle and somewhat genetics.
No, I would say actually very strongly genetics. So type 2 diabetes is a genetic condition. PCOS is a genetic condition. It's what they call an autosomal dominant condition, where if one parent has the gene, you have a 50% chance of inheriting it. If two parents have the gene, you have a 75% chance of inheriting it. So I think what's really helpful for people to understand is that insulin resistance is so common because historically, throughout human history, insulin resistance was actually a very helpful way to prevent human beings from starving to death when they were under physiologic stress. So the body is always going to prioritize the brain as the primary recipient of fuel, because without the brain, nothing else in the body works. So back in our caveman ancestor days, back in the Stone Age, if a clan was experiencing drought or famine and the food supply was drying up, the body will say, listen, we want to survive to get to that next oasis. We need to prioritize fueling the brain. So in order to get that accomplished, our body geniusly learned to make the muscles back off on their glucose utilization, because muscles use the most glucose in the body because we have a lot of muscles, but the brain is the most concentrated user of glucose. So in order to prioritize the brain for fuel when physiologic stress set in, the body learned to make the muscles back off and become insulin resistant, so the muscles would use less fuel. In fact, that's what pregnancy does. Pregnancy makes the mother insulin resistant to preserve sugar in the blood for the developing baby.
Okay, there's actually a type of diabetes. They call it, I'm drawing a blank on the name because my first wife actually had that issue. It was
gestational diabetes.
Okay, so there you go. Okay.
So the idea is, back and throughout most of history, physiologic stress was risk of starvation, infection, or injury. Nowadays, physiologic stress is much more, not that that doesn't happen in parts of the world, but overwhelmingly what we experience as physiologic stress is obesity, sedentary lifestyles, kind of junky diet, not enough plant foods, whole foods to provide that countering of the inflammation and the oxidation, and to allow our body to detox itself. So our body is stressed out for a different reason, but it's still kind of throwing us into this insulin resistant state. So the way I think of insulin resistance, it's like an umbrella condition under which you have type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, which is on the road to diabetes, metabolic syndrome, which is another problem that's a scourge in our on our culture because of all of these effects, and polycystic ovary syndrome, and likely type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. So we're continuing to learn and appreciate more about these things. But, again, when you frame the conversation that this is a genetic predisposition that used to be beneficial, but now it's sort of good gene gone bad. What used to be helpful is now causing problems. We can't sit around and wait for our genes to evolve and change, because that takes, 10,000 years. We need to learn to eat according to the expectations of the human body. And so that is, again, I'm always trying to educate my reader to understand your body thinks it's doing you a favor based on its expectations, but the environment is really causing, toxic manifestations of those genes that used to be so helpful.
Now, I know this is coming out of left field, but you made my brain go there. What are your thoughts about ketosis and actually, the brain and the muscle using ketones as an energy source to kind of spare the insulin response?
So ketosis, again, it's an adaptation. It's meant to get humans to survive through times of food shortage by allowing us to tap into our body fat to create fuel, because the brain can work off of ketones as a fuel source. The thing about ketogenic diets, is that where you're kind of going? Like, that's where it's kind of a big buzz term, trying to create ketosis. In order to get your body into ketosis, you have to be on an extremely low carbohydrate diet, extremely low, like under double digits. And, the diet has to be higher in fat, higher in protein. A ketogenic diet without good, solid clinical evidence that there aren't long-term consequences to it is really, in my mind, another over-restrictive diet that doesn't stand a chance of lasting long-term, and probably shouldn't, because ketosis evolved to help people over the humps of starvation, not to be a place where somebody should linger long term. So I also work at a cancer institute, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, a couple days a week, and we get the ketosis question on the cancer front, and that's another kind of interesting, currently being studied area. But any kind of a dietary pattern that really requires people to eat in a way that cannot be sustained long term, or shouldn't be because it's not designed to, and it's probably not healthy, I see very limited value to going there. I see it as one more diet that will likely cause a lot of muscle loss over time. As a personal trainer, you can appreciate that. Just because you're not eating glucose doesn't mean your body is going to go without fuel. So it'll just, I call it burning the furniture to keep your house warm. Starts kind of catabolizing your muscles to create fuel. So I don't know if that's a longer-winded version of what you're getting at. But
No, it's an interesting side to the conversation, because I've talked to people on both sides of this. And, it is something that I wish people could make money selling ketosis so that they would do more studies. And it's just unfortunate that we have to just wait for someone who sees a condition and there's enough people suffering from the condition to say, we should probably just do this study anyway and just do it for the sake of humankind and understand it. But I guess the only reason I went there, and the only reason that's really important to me to kind of have this conversation in the first place, and hopefully studies and things will come about, is that we are dealing with a situation our bodies were not designed to deal with, where there's an overabundance of carbohydrates in our food. We're eating far more carbohydrates today than we've ever eaten in the history of man, because they're just so easy to get. And the ones we're getting are processed and just not what we were designed to survive on. So the sessions of feasting and famine, and then, okay, it's springtime and there's berries and fruit, and then we get into the fall and now there's nuts and whatnot. We're putting on some body fat, and then our body says, okay, you stored that body fat so we can survive, 3 months without all the fruits and vegetables and things that we were used to eating. You're going to go dig up some roots, and you're going to go kill some animals and catch some fish. And that's what we're going to survive on for the next 3 months if you're going to make it through this winter. And we had to make sure that we maintained a good, healthy body so that our hormones would be corrected, so that they would tell us, okay, these guys are healthy enough. They've got enough food to procreate and take care of this baby. Otherwise, your body's going to break down and basically say, sorry, you're just not healthy enough to do this for me.
They've been studying ketosis for 30 years in children with seizure disorders. And right now there are some trials going on, mainly looking at brain tumors based on the way brain metabolizes fuel. So I think the research is coming. What I'm always trying to figure out is, how can I help people eat healthier, because to get into a ketosis, there are a lot of healthy foods that you cannot eat because categorically the carbohydrates. And so as a nutritionist, I'm, as a rule, tend to default to I'm much more interested in what my people are eating because there's so much evidence that tells us that the thousands of phytonutrients that are in plant foods, the healthy fats that come from plant and seafood sources, the dietary fiber, the fact that ideally we would get, a good probably 3/4 of our calories from unrefined carbohydrate, fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and nuts and seeds, and limit our intake of, red meat. There's a lot of evidence to point to the synergy that goes along with actually putting those things into your body and allowing your body to use those to neutralize the inflammation, oxidation, and toxic junk we're exposed to that contribute to the development of pretty much every chronic disease. And then somewhere in there, you have to find a place for people to be happy with how they're eating, to feel like they can still enjoy food as one of life's great pleasures without setting up thinking that's too exclusive into good foods, bad foods. We end up just, overwhelming people sometimes, I think, with too many do's and don'ts, where I prefer to assume that if I just try to get people to eat more whole fruit, not juice, loads of vegetables, almost nobody does it enough. Get some plant-based proteins into your diet so you're not eating animal proteins, every day. If I can just keep getting them to add things of value, frequently the less desirable things start to get nudged out of the diet.
Well, full disclosure, I do actually cycle in and out of ketosis. I'm in my winter right now because I'm preparing for the running season coming up. So I actually am in ketosis right now. The interesting thing is, I will say I'm fortunate. My genotypes and things I've got going on, I'm not insulin resistant. I don't really have a problem with blood sugar. But what I basically found is that it's a period of cleansing. I guess, fasting's been a big part of history of saying we need to go through these feasts and famines even when food is plentiful, just so our body has an opportunity to go through that cycle that it's gotten used to for hundreds of thousands of millions of years.
Yeah. No, I think there is a significant amount of evidence looking at maybe fasting 2 days a week, going in and out of, just basically when you fast, you really lower oxidation in your body. So, that to me is different than chronic ketosis. But, again, we could get off.
Yeah, and we have.
We could go on and on.
Yeah, well, I can. That's what I say. I love this stuff. Anyway, okay, in the book, and I think this is very important, is when folks want to change something, there's an inherent fear. There's an inherent pull away from it. One of my favorite books is Who Moved My Cheese? It's really a book all about change and how these 4 different mice and their 4 different kind of types of what they then equate, to people in the lesson of this book. And it's a short book. So anyone that hasn't read Who Moved My Cheese and you're afraid of change, I would do that, because it was these 4 mice that were fed cheese, and basically someone moved the cheese, and there were 2 of them that just decided, okay, well, we're going to go find the cheese because we know there's cheese. We just have to go find it. The other 2 were like, oh, woe is me. Change is terrible. And so it was really kind of an internal look of how you deal with change. But you've provided 9 strategies for helping people deal with diet and lifestyle change. Do you mind taking just a moment to kind of go through those 9 and give us just a little bit of information about how those apply?
Well, yes. Sometimes in order to make change in our life, there's a certain number of truisms that we have to accept. And the first being that human beings are not perfect. We are physically and psychologically flexible, and that's how we've managed to survive on this planet. But the strategies that I tried to highlight are things to help people get beyond the psychological muck of not being able to get out of our own way sometimes. So, my first strategy is to learn how your body works. It's not the enemy. I think I've already touched on that. Just, knowledge is power, and really understanding the human body. I always say to people, I don't care if you hated science when you were in school. I believe that we can get a few important points across here that will give you a better appreciation for what's going on in your body and how what you do with diet and lifestyle affects it. And I've never seen it fail. I can honestly say I have never had a woman with PCOS fully understand everything that was going on with diet and lifestyle and how it was affecting their hormones. My second strategy is try to avoid the I'm a failure syndrome. So I actually included in this book something that I tell my patients all the time, which is what I often see getting in the way of people's success is what I call the Z curve of failure. And the Z curve of failure is they get going on yet one more kind of diet, something that often is, kind of eliminates a food category or, we all know what they look like. And they often set the bar quite high. So they get on their plan and they're doing great and feeling empowered. And then life throws marbles under their feet, which it always will, because life is not static. What often happens then is we lapse, we blow it up into a big tragedy, we beat ourselves up, oh my God, I knew I couldn't do this, and then we skid into the ditch and we stay there until the next perfect Monday rolls around where we think we can regroup. When you look at evidence from the National Weight Control Registry, which collects data on people who lose weight and manage to keep it off as opposed to regain it, their journey looks more like an EKG. They get going on a plan. When they lapse, rather than blowing it up into a personal failure, they pick themselves up, dust themselves off, they analyze the lapse, they try to learn a lesson if there's one embedded in there, and they get back on track. So their journey looks more like an EKG. And so understanding that the Z-curve of failure is never going to work. We don't expect that degree of perfection in any other aspect of our life. I always tell my clients, listen, if every time you fought with your partner, you got a divorce, you'd constantly be looking for a new one. If every time you messed up at work, you quit your job, you'd constantly be looking for a new job. We need to have a certain amount of forgiveness and acceptance. Strategy number 3 is to keep a food journal. They've studied this so much, they should just move on and study something else. Journaling, whether it's a piece of paper, an assignment notebook and a golf pencil, or a high-tech app. And I work with my patients. Many of them are on technologies to help them log. We're trying to take something that human beings are not naturally designed to pay attention to and make us aware of. So we're really, from our caveman ancestors, designed to be opportunistic eaters. Eat what you see because your risk of survival is your ability to survive is contingent upon eating everything edible.
And honest truth, we all know when we see a fresh berry, like I walked by, I have some property, and I walked past and I saw this blackberry and it was perfectly ripe and I just snatched it. I knew if I came back the next day, that berry either wouldn't be there or it wouldn't be perfect the way it was at that moment. Now, I also recognized that there were probably about 10 or 12 other berries on that plant that are very likely going to be ripe in another 3 or 4 days. And so that whole period of time when that high, what I would call, I guess at that point, high sugar, it's not really that high sugar because it's natural, but it's only going to be there for maybe a month best. So I'm going to keep going back to that blackberry place. That was my food source. I would keep going back there every day for a month and eat my fill of blackberries, but then it's gone.
But you wouldn't be considering, what did I eat this morning? What am I going to eat tonight? We're in this, you eat what you see, because that was the risk of starvation was the greatest threat to human survival. So we now have the same, all of our senses are tied up in get enough fuel. That's why the sight of food, the smell of food, the sound of food, so many things, kind of get us thinking about food. So keeping a journal, regardless of how you do that, takes this thing that is kind of designed to be sort of behind our back and puts it in front of our face. And it allows people to actually kind of audit and see if what I think I'm doing with food, I'm actually really doing. Strategy number 4, don't eat too much at night. This subject just fascinates me. I'm obsessed with circadian rhythms. I've said for over 25 years to my clients, again, I've spoken to thousands of people about how they eat and what they struggle with. And eating too much at night is a recipe for many people, not all, but for many people, it's the fast track to gaining too much weight and having more difficulty losing it. So finally, thankfully, they're starting to do studies on circadian rhythms, which is the internal hormonal cycle of the body. Our hormones wax and wane based on the 24-hour cycle, independent of light, by the way, which I think is really interesting. Even in the dark, our body knows what to do. And I was actually just at a conference by a sleep researcher at Harvard University last week, and he was saying how their studies, they find that many people, at least half of the population, probably have a genetic predisposition to be more insulin sensitive in the morning and more insulin resistant at night. And one of the things insulin resistance does is it encourages the deposition of fat in your gut. It's called visceral adipose tissue. Human bodies appear to expect a fasting state at night. And this pattern we have of skewing our food to the evening means we're depriving our body of fasting, and it's during that fasting stage that our body likely does some mining of our fat stores. So yeah, I try to touch on that a little bit more in this edition of the book. Strategy 5, accept that there's some discomfort involved. There's discomfort involved in not being able to eat everything that you want. There just is. And that's because we're not designed to have to deprive ourselves of food. actually quite the opposite. But I really believe that if people try to be proactive eaters and try to eat before they're starved, the discomfort is less. We try to rescue ourselves from being hypoglycemic and over hungry by rallying that little bit of willpower, that human beings aren't born with a lot of. It never favored human survival to be ignorant about food. So we can rally a little willpower and good intentions to help us over the bumps if we're trying to be a proactive eater throughout the day. But if you go too long without eating and you don't eat enough, and then you get, hypoglycemia is largely your central nervous system screaming for fuel. Your good intentions and your willpower are going to get flattened under those conditions. Number 6, focus on the positive. Again, I try to encourage people to focus on the steps they can take to add healthful habits to their diet and their lifestyle, as opposed to focusing on the things that they can't have. Number 7 is make losing weight a priority. Losing as little as 5 to 10% of your body weight when you have PCOS may be enough to prevent diabetes and improve fertility. Strategy 8, manage your mindset and your expectations. So again, that kind of circles back to the Z curve of failure. Humans aren't perfect. We have to accept that. We have to accept, I kind of touch on, and much of this has emerged over the years from just talking to thousands of people. You can't change the past. You can learn from it. Change is tough. Go easy on yourself. Be forgiving. Try to take it one day at a time. Set small goals. Listen to your body. Pay attention to what it's telling you. Accept that, I think this is a big one. And, we all struggle with this. Accept that if you bring high-risk foods into your house, in all likelihood, you'll eat them. I know I couldn't have a bag of potato chips in my house and expect to willpower my way around it. And I wouldn't expect anybody else to avoid whatever their kind of risk food is.
When the doorbell rings in February, just don't answer the door. It's Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah. Which I understand the box is getting smaller, but the prices aren't going down, is what one of my clients told me the other day.
I imagine there's still just as many calories in the box.
Yeah, probably. And the last one is don't go it alone. Human beings are supposed to live in clans. There's a reason for that. We're supposed to be nurturing of one another, supportive of one another. Accountability is huge. I have a number of clients who people oftentimes come and say, I don't know why I'm here. I know what to do. Well, knowing what to do and having a place to touch base, keep the ball in the air, maintain some accountability, even though they know I'm not going to yell at them. That's not my style. But people need one another. And the buddy system on many levels is really, really important when it comes to lifestyle change, whether you're talking about somebody meeting you in the corner to go for your walk, showing up at the gym to work out with you. Or I had one client who she and her girlfriend actually cooked for one another. Like they each took a different couple nights of the week and made leftovers and gave each other food. I thought that was genius, but that's how humans expect, that's how the clan kind of structure existed throughout all of history.
And that's what I've told people. I'm like, invite your friends over on Sunday and sit down and just talk and prepare meals. And, you can prepare 3 or 4 different types of meals working together as a team, package them up, and each of you take your share. And you've probably cut your grocery bill. You've had a great afternoon together, and now you're holding each other accountable to, here's your lunch and dinner for the next week. You've already made for your family. You don't even have to pop in something processed into the microwave to feed your family. You've already kind of got it all set and ready to go.
And you had fun doing it. And you spent quality time together. I think it's a phenomenal idea. Nothing makes me feel more proud as I have 3 sons. My oldest son lives in New York City, and every 2 weeks he spends Sunday afternoon cooking, and he makes massive quantities. I called him a few weeks ago, and he told me he was about to start rolling, so he didn't have much time to speak with me, which I was thinking, rolling? What? I don't know if I want to know. He was making burritos, and then he later sent me a photograph of a platter with 16 ground turkey with like 5 different kinds of vegetables and sweet potatoes that he was going to eat for lunch for the next 2 weeks. It made my heart sing. Yeah, my heart was singing and soaring, I have to tell you.
That's awesome. As a nutritionist, you got to love that they at least somehow or another caught on to what you were doing.
Oh, God, yes.
Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but I really can't walk away from this book without us at least talking a little bit about your strategies on exercise, because I enjoyed the fact that, you coming from the nutrition side really kind of had an appreciation for balance. And so could you kind of talk about your strategies around exercise?
So, I think it's really important for people to think of exercise as not just going to the gym. I mean, we know that a lot of people, that's not their thing. That people be appreciative of anything that involves not just sitting. What I try to do in the book is to tap into the recommendations from the American College of Sports Medicine, who, when I first started reading the recommendations many years ago, I think the recommendations were only for cardio kinds of activities. And now there's actually 4 different recommendations. There's the cardio piece. So it can just be walking. I think there's so many people that think like they need to run and suffer in order to be doing cardio. And I say, no, the people in the National Weight Control Registry who lost weight and kept it off, their number one reported activity is walking. All you need is a good pair of shoes and some time. So to really focus on at least 150 minutes a week of moderate activity, cardio type. But I also help to them to translate that into, 2 minutes of moderate activity can be traded in for 1 minute of vigorous. So 75 minutes of jogging or, singles tennis can replace 150 minutes of walking or doubles tennis, those kinds of things. So I try to break it down into specific activities, ideally at least a couple times a week, 2 or 3 of some sort of strengthening activity. Again, we're kind of trying to replicate what life was like throughout most of history, where people were dragging and chopping and hammering and pulling and, all these things that actually used our muscles that we don't do. The American College of Sports Medicine now actually includes stretching, and also, I can't remember the term, but it's something like neuromuscular. It's basically balance. And so I'm a huge fan of yoga for the stretching and the balance pieces, but that's certainly not the only way to do it. If someone is interested in weight loss, they may need to push the bar a little higher to more like 250 minutes of activity a week. But I literally provide opportunities in the book for people to say, this is what this might look like. Here is an example of how you might piece together your 150 minutes of physical activity and your couple of episodes of strength training, for example.
And that's like what I said. I really kind of like the balance of all that, how you put it all together. And particularly for someone who's over 40, those 4 modalities are really kind of the core 4 for you to really be considering to live a better lifestyle, just in general, not just because you might be struggling with a metabolic issue or PCOS. It's just, those are just good, hard things that you should be doing for yourself anyway. So, Hillary, I really appreciate having you on the show. I appreciate everything that you've shared with us. The book is the PCOS Diet Plan, and I learned a lot about this condition. I didn't know a whole lot about it going in, so I was a little, most books I read, I kind of have an idea where I'm going to go. Your book was something where I was like, okay, I'm entering a zone. I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. But the reason I actually have you on is because one of my listeners asked for me to have a guest, on to talk about this. So,
that's great. I love that.
So I really do appreciate that you took the time to spend with us today. Now, if someone wanted to reach out to you to learn more about this or to get the book, where would you like for me to send them?
So if you just go to HillaryWright.com, also PCOSDiet.com will bring you to my website where there is contact information and links to buy the book. So, it's available through all of the major online resellers, the biggest ones being, obviously Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and IndieBound, I think is the third one. There are some copies that you will find in bookstores. So I think, most people these days, it's actually also available in a Kindle version. I find a lot of younger people often buy the Kindle version, though. They also, I sometimes get to double dip because sometimes they buy the Kindle version and realize that the charts look better in the book form and they end up buying the book.
And that's the point. The references and the information in the book, we just scratched the surface today. So thank you. Now, this is going to be episode 247. So you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/247, and I'll be sure to have links to Hillary's site, to the book site, and to the book on Amazon. So again, Hillary, thank you so much for being on 40 Plus Fitness.
Oh, thank you so much for caring to speak with me. I'm thrilled.
Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Jeff Galloway and discuss his book, The Run, Walk, Run Method. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.